Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Binghamton Success Week. We have two webinars this week and an in-person event in New York City tomorrow night as part of this hybrid week of programming. I'm Steve C. Prasad, happy to be your host for today. And I thank you so much for joining us as we kick off Binghamton Success Week with a webinar titled Managing Others Through Mindfulness. As you'll hear from our featured speaker today, part of managing others is managing yourself, but I won't go too much into the topic. We'll leave it up to our expert on that. And so happy to have you with us today. Just wanted to have two quick commercials, and then we'll get on to the housekeeping, and then we'll begin with the webinar itself. I want to put a quick plug in for the Alumni Travel Program. You can find the link to this from our homepage, binghamton.edu/alumni. 3 great trips planned for this year. The Southwest National Park's coming up in May. That one's coming up pretty soon, so you want to jump on that one. Discover Southeast Alaska is planned for August, and Flavors of Northern Italy. It's a great trip to take in the fall. We'll be offering that in October. And one more thing, we've just recently created a podcast series. We've got a couple of episodes online on Spotify. So go to Spotify, search for Binghamton Alumni Podcast, and you'll find some great content there. It's a way for us to share alumni success stories. And we know based on the success of these webinars that you like having the sort of content that you can access anytime. So it's up to us to provide more of that. Now, just a couple of things before we bring in Rebecca Cassidy. If you have a question for our presenter, and we certainly hope that you do, these are more fun when your questions are added into the mix. Start sending them now. You can send them through the comment box on Facebook if you're watching on the Alumni Association Facebook page. If you registered ahead of time and are watching on the microsite, there should be a comment box there as well. And from time to time, I'll put my email address up on the screen, so it'll be a banner that looks a little something like this. And you don't have to write that down right this second. It'll be back up periodically during the presentation when it's not covering up text on the slide. And send your questions. Start whenever you want, and we will mix these in during rather than saving them to the end. We want this to be interactive and fun for everybody involved. And with that in mind, let's go ahead and roll into the introduction of our featured speaker for today. So very pleased to bring in Rebecca Cassidy from Binghamton's class of 1997. She has extensive experience in coaching, training, and advising both college students and mid-career professionals. Certainly very well versed to talk about today's topic being mindfulness and managing yourself, managing others. She's a project manager at Georgetown University, and before that she did some international nonprofit work in Japan and has delved into writing books and is the author of Women at Work, Successful Tips for Working Together. This book was published just 2 years ago in 2022. Rebecca, thanks so much for joining us. Great to have you with us on the webinar.
Thank you, Steve, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Greetings from the Washington, D.C. area where I live and work. Just to give you a little bit more background about myself, I've been here at Georgetown for about 13 years, was student-facing for most of it, working in career services for about 8 of those 13 years. So worked a lot with undergrads, and also went through some mind-body medicine training at Georgetown Medical School, where I was able to then turn around and teach mind-body medicine to both medical students and to undergrads for about 4 years or so. I got my MBA from Washington University, which is just down the road from Georgetown. And of course, graduated from Binghamton with a degree in psychology in 1997, as Steve mentioned. Went overseas for a little bit, did some nonprofit work there in Tokyo, Japan, before coming back to the DC area and entering the higher ed realm and here in DC. So really happy to talk to you today about mindfulness and how that connects to leadership, how that connects to managing others. If you are like me, when you moved into a management position, you probably didn't have a ton of training in how to manage others and how to be a good leader. So it was something that was sort of learned on the fly by myself and probably you as well. So Steve, if we can get the slides up. There we go. All right. So what I'd like to do today, make sure, let me go back a little bit. We're going to talk about leadership, what it is and what it isn't, how it's different from management, and also talk about emotional intelligence and social intelligence and how those play into leadership. We'll talk about mindfulness and the various tools that you can use to build your mindfulness muscle. And then we'll talk about challenging conversations. I'm assuming that's why a lot of you are here today, is how do I manage others and have those challenging conversations. And then, of course, the so what. Now, what do I do with this information? So, and really the goal for me today is to share with you how leadership and management are connected to all of these different things. All of these things are combined. They are all intertwined. And by focusing on ourselves first, we can then become better managers and leaders for others. Before we get into that, what I'd like to do, if for those of you on the microsite, and if you can put in the comments, what's your stress level at the moment? Just put a number from 1 through 10. You know, maybe you are asking yourself, why am I here when I have 5,000 other things to do? Maybe you are in a state of bliss at the moment. But go ahead and put in the comments wherever you are, or just kind of, note to yourself, I'm feeling like a 7, I'm feeling like a 5, I'm feeling like a 10, or a 25 out of 10. So yeah, go ahead and just check in with yourself. And now what I'd like to do is what's called a body scan. So if you're in your office and you feel a little bit awkward, there's really nothing you need to do other than to listen to my voice. If you are in a position where you can close your eyes, that's even better. So for this body scan, all you need to do is just to listen to what I'm asking you to do, and then just follow the direction. So if you are able to close your eyes, go ahead and close your eyes. Take a nice deep inhale through your nose. Open mouth exhale. And just start to settle in. If you can put your feet flat on the floor, go ahead and do so. And then from here, all I'd like you to do is to move your attention to the crown of your head. Just check in, see how the crown of your head is feeling. Move your attention down to your forehead. Maybe let your eyebrows fall, uncrunch your forehead. Move your attention down to your temples, down to your ears. Just notice what you're hearing. What are you hearing other than the sound of my voice? Are there people around you? Is there construction outside? Is it windy? Now move your attention to your nose and take a nice big inhale through your nose. What do you smell? Maybe people are eating their lunch. Hopefully nobody microwaved any fish. Move your attention to your jaw. See if you can relax your jaw, unclench your jaw, allow the tongue to fall from the roof of your mouth. See what you taste. See what's there on your tongue. And move your attention down to your neck. Allow your throat to open up a bit. Allow your shoulders to fall away from your ears. Move your attention to your collarbones, down into your ribs, down your spine, into your hips, into your thighs and hamstrings. See if you can relax your thighs, relax your hamstrings, into your calf muscles, into your ankles, the tops of your feet, the bottoms of your feet, into your toes. Give your toes a little wiggle. Move your attention back up to your shoulders. We don't want to forget our arms. So move your attention to your upper arms. Check in with your elbows. Check in with your forearms, your wrists, the backs of your hands, the palms of your hands. Give your fingers a little wiggle. Maybe make your hands into a fist and then let it go. Take a nice big inhale through your nose. Open mouth exhale. And if your eyes are closed, you can open your eyes, bring yourself back into the room. And now rate your stress level. check in with yourself. I'm hoping that your stress level dropped. Hopefully it went from somewhere in the middle, hopefully not too high. Hopefully it came down some. And really what you just did is a meditation. Now, it may not have felt like a stereotypical meditation, but by bringing the attention to different parts of your body, you brought your attention into the moment. And that is what meditation and mindfulness is. Meditation is a tool to become more mindful of what's happening within, more mindful of what's happening around you. So maybe you notice the sounds, maybe you notice the smells, maybe you notice some creaky parts within your body that you didn't notice before. But the act of noticing, that's what mindfulness is. And that's a tool that we will use to become better leaders, to become better managers, and to care for our teams and for those around us. So all of that said, hopefully that was a positive experience for you. But let's go ahead and talk about what being a manager is and what being a leader is. So think about the role of a manager. Maybe you're a manager. Maybe you are, you report to somebody else who is a manager, maybe both. So what pops into your mind when you think about the role of a manager? There are probably annual evaluations to do. That's the season that we are in now here at Georgetown. Maybe there are other reports that you are responsible for. The Oxford definition of a manager is it is somebody who is responsible for controlling or administering all or part of a company or similar organization. So when you think about that definition, that feels a little clinical, right? It feels like you are in control of something, you are responsible for making something happen, and ultimately you are. But as somebody who is managed, it might not feel fantastic to be controlled or to be directed. So when we start to talk about leadership, we start to talk about something else. Think about the best leader that you've ever had. Maybe it was somebody you reported to. Maybe it was a leader of an organization that you were part of. But when you think about that leader, check in with how you feel. That leader probably made you feel pretty good, right? You probably felt listened to. You probably felt heard. Think about the things that they said or they did that really, made you want to follow them, that made you want to do what they wanted you to do, or to, follow them in a particular direction. Leaders have a way of making you feel good about yourself. So managers and leaders can occupy the same role, but the managers often are very focused on what do I need to do today? How do I check the boxes? Where leaders are often focused on the people around them. So as we start to think about what is a leader, which is really where most of us want to be, we start to think about, well, what does that mean? Okay. Again, the dictionary definition, pretty clinical. The office or position of a leader, the capacity to lead. But there are lots of people who work in this space and do research in this space. And one definition that I like is leadership is the process of influencing others towards the achievement of a goal. So it's not that command and control that the management definition sort of implied. It's more about the influence. So how do I, as a leader, influence the people around me to move towards a goal? Now, leaders are not just people at work. If you have kids and you are trying to get them out the door, the question is, how do you influence your kids to get out the door in the morning to get to school? If you are, trying to organize friends on a trip, how do you get them to move in a direction that you want them to go? And that's really what leadership is. It's influencing people to follow you in a certain direction to achieve a goal. And Daniel Goleman is another researcher in this space, and his comment, he's got a lot of books out there, you can look him up. Good leaders are more than just technically competent. They also have high levels of emotional intelligence. Now, I'm going to guess, so there are some people watching this who were put in a management position or a leadership position because they were good at their previous role. So you might have gone from a position of making widgets And now you are overseeing the people who are making the widgets. Now, it's great that you are recognized for your skill in making the widgets, but your role in overseeing others just changed. So you are no longer as responsible for making the widgets. You are trying to make sure that you are leading other people to make the widgets. And that's a different skill set. And part of that skill set is what's called emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is made up of 5 components: self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation and goal orientation, empathy, and social skills. So when you think back to that leader that you really look up to, that you really admire, I'm guessing they had most or all of these components at some level. Maybe they weren't a perfect 100% across the board, but they probably had some level of self-awareness. They probably had some level of self-regulation. They might have emotionally cared for you and the mission of your organization, but they probably didn't fly off the handle when something went wrong. They were motivated, they were goal-oriented, they knew where they wanted the group to go, and they worked to get them there. And then the 2 key components to emotional intelligence are empathy and social skills. So good leaders are empathetic. They get it. They get what other people are going through. Now, it might be because they used to be the widget maker, and so they know what the other widget makers are going through. Or it just could be they can read the room. They can see what's going on, and that takes practice too. It's not a natural skill for everybody, but just being able to look around and to kind of read the room, that sense of empathy and social skills, those make really good leaders. They can kind of see what's going on, and they can preventively react to something that might become a problem in the near future. So, and that's often good leaders will be able to look at a team, say, there's something off over here. I think I might need to address it. And they address it in the moment, or at least in a timely manner. And that's another characteristic of a good leader. They don't let things fester.
I'm going to jump in if you don't mind, because I look at the slide and I think of something that's somewhat common in the workplace, where you have people that are just conditioned to putting their head down and getting the work done. And they feel like that's success. And maybe during their history, they've been rewarded for doing that and received promotions or received additional rewards. But at a certain point, that stops, and they get passed over for taking the next step up. And they don't understand why that was. I was getting my work done. I was doing what I should be doing, but they weren't really in spending the time trying to focus on getting the job done itself, not developing those soft skills, and not really thinking about there's a personality elements that need to be developed to show, okay, you're ready to have that higher position.
Yeah, and that's really common because at usually lower levels of organizations, you're right. You put your head down, you get your work done, and it's usually kind of after your schooling, because at school, what do you get rewarded for? You put your head down, you study, you take the test, you get your A, and you move on. But there's a certain point in your career where you have to start to lift your head and start to look around. And that's where you start to build social capital. And that's a different presentation altogether, but building that social capital becomes really important. And chances are most of us have worked with somebody who got promoted, and you're like, wait a minute, they never did a thing. They never lifted a finger. How is it that they got promoted and I didn't? I got all of my work done. Well, you're being rewarded for getting your work done by continuing to get your work done. You're good at your job. You stay where you are. But at some point, if you want to move up, you have to start to lift your head from the head down work, start to look around and start to build that social capital. And you do so through emotional intelligence, and then what we also call social intelligence. So thank you, Steve, for that segue. Social intelligence is if emotional intelligence is looking inward and being aware of yourself. Social intelligence is being aware of what's happening around you. So Richard Boyatzis is another researcher in this arena. And he says emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and use emotional information about oneself to lead or affect performance, while social intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and use emotional information about others to lead or affect performance. So that's where that kind of reading the room comes into play. So I used to have a team of 7 that reported to me, And every once in a while, there'd be a little bit of a scuffle, and it wasn't obvious, but I'd kind of notice something going on. And as I got to know my team better, I could pick up on it much more quickly. And so once I would see that, then it's time for, one person of the two who would scuffle. One person, she liked direct conversations, and we had to have a conversation about it, and we would. And, that's not my normal style. I'm kind of a non-confrontational person, but that's how she liked to communicate. So that's how I learned to work with her. Whereas the other person was much more about, like, let's go out to coffee, let's talk through it, let's build a relationship. So part of this too is understanding how different people work and how different people communicate, and then learning to adjust your own communication style and management style to make them feel comfortable. Because once they feel comfortable with you, it's much easier to start guiding a team of people towards a particular goal for your organization. So, and that's where that social intelligence comes in, is reading that room to be able to say, oh, there's something over here I have to pay attention to. Oh, they're good right now. Let's take advantage of this time and start to get some more stuff done so that we can get to that particular goal. So socially intelligent leaders are mindful leaders. So if, let's think about mindlessness. Who maybe even today has kind of scrolled mindlessly through their social media feed, looking through, oh, that's funny, oh, that's cute, or whatever. That mindlessness is just sort of not really paying attention to what's going on. Or maybe you're driving and all of a sudden you don't remember the last 2 miles. That's the mindlessness. So mindlessness is being unaware of what's happening around you. Mindfulness is therefore being aware of what is happening around you. So it's that stopping, it's that pause that we did during our body scan. It's the looking around saying, okay, what's happening right now? What's happening in the moment? Let's not think about what I need to prepare for dinner. Let's not think about what happened in that meeting yesterday. Let's focus on this moment and what's happening around me, and even what's happening within me. Mindful leaders, like I said, are aware of what their constituents or what their followers are going through. They get it. And that comes from getting to know people on your team, whether they report to you or not. And they're aware of the impact that various decisions will have on their team going forward. So if I am told one day I need to have my team produce more widgets, okay, a maybe more manager kind of person will say, okay, team, we need to produce more widgets. Let's go do it. Okay, well, if you're producing more widgets, there are other things that might have to fall by the wayside because there are only so many hours in a day. So a leader will say, okay, team, we need to produce more widgets, but to do so, we're going to not worry about this part of our job right now. That's going to have to fall to the wayside so we can focus on this thing over here. And my guess is, for those people who had really great leaders, you probably had a leader who was able to balance those different priorities because they understand that their team or their followers are people, and there are only so many hours in the day, and we are more than just our job. So to understand that our teams, our people are people, and they are going through stuff at home, and there's always something popping up if you have ever managed people. And you display that level of empathy. It's like, I get it. We can't just produce widgets all day. We need to figure out how to balance all of our responsibilities, because I'm guessing most of us have probably more than one job, even at our jobs. So it's, how do you balance those different things and recognize that the people in your kind of circle, whether they report to you directly or not, that they have other responsibilities as well. And we don't want to burn them out. So how do we become mindful leaders? So we'll kind of get into some step-by-step tactics here. Step one, I can't stress this enough, do one thing at a time. How many of you have been in a meeting where the person you are interacting with is doing something else as well? Maybe they're checking their email, maybe they're looking through their phone, maybe they got a notification about something. And so when that happens, you are giving your full attention to this person, but they're not giving you their full attention. Like, how do you feel when that happens? You feel a little ignored, right? I once had somebody I reported to who every single one-on-one meeting should be doing email at the same time. And it drove me nuts. And one time, and it not I did say to her, I said, listen, is this a bad time? We can like reschedule this for a different time. And I wasn't being snarky about it or anything. I was just like, well, maybe she's got other things to do. She's much higher on the totem pole than I am. And she said, no, this is fine. And she just kept going. But I wish she had said, you know what? Yeah, let's come back and do this another time so I can give you my full attention. And that's what good leaders do, is they give you their full attention in the moment. Maybe it's only for 30 seconds, but it's 30 seconds of full attention. So when you are meeting with people, turn off your notifications. If you're doing focused work, have one tab open at a time. I have multiple windows, but I try to have just one thing going on my screen at a time. And there's lots of different ways you can do time management. And again, that's a different conversation, but block off time for email, block off time for focused work, and block off time for breaks. It's really important to care for ourselves as leaders. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then when time is up, so if you block off an hour to do email, when that hour is up, it's time to move on. And give yourself some space to move on. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes for the human brain to switch gears. So if you are doing one thing, give yourself about 5 minutes to switch to a different task and then focus on that thing. So if you have a one-on-one with one of your direct reports, give yourself about 5 minutes, get your brain into that one-on-one mode, and then talk to that one-on-one person and give them their full attention. And step 2 is to care for yourself. Again, when we talk about becoming mindful leaders, becoming good leaders, we start with ourselves first. So we start with within, then we look around us and figure out how to care for others. And again, we'll talk about having challenging conversations as well. But we start from within first, and then we work our way out. So obvious things: physical care, nutrition, exercise, and sleep. And yes, I put in parentheses with an exclamation point because, these days sleep is kind of elusive. So depending on where you are in your life, but if you can get those magical 8 hours of sleep, please do. You're only doing yourself a favor. Stimulate the brain. And this could be something that is, fun, like whether it's Sudoku, crossword puzzle, those sorts of things, you can do that. But it could be even just going for a mindful walk. Allow your brain to relax and to switch gears. It's good for your brain. When I was going through my training for mind-body medicine, one of the things I started to do was to really pay attention on my commute. So living in the DC area, I would take the metro in, and I really started to think about, how does it feel being on this metro car? What am I smelling? And there are lots of smells. What's under my feet as I'm going up the escalator? How does that feel? How does the railing feel under my hand when I go from the escalator to the cement outside? How does that feel on my feet? And what am I seeing when I come outside? And just really starting to use the 5 senses in those experiences, those day-to-day experiences. You really do arrive to your destination much calmer and much more centered. So even after this particular presentation, if you are going from your desk to the lunch break area, or you're getting into your car to go to the next thing, like just really kind of stop and just start to use your different senses to process what's happening around you. That stimulates the brain, and that also brings you back to a point of being centered and mindful as well. And once you're mindful and you're calm, you can start to deal with everybody else's drama as well. It is much easier to deal with others when you are in a state of calm versus when you are kind of ramped up and you're anxious and your cortisol levels are shooting through the roof. And so here's my pitch for meditation. Meditation is a tool, and it's a tool to get to this place of mindfulness. We kind of have this stereotype of like sitting cross-legged with our hands up, eyes closed, and chanting Om and all of that. But meditation is a lot of different things. First of all, what it's not an absence of thought. In my opinion, asking your brain to stop thinking is like asking your heart to stop beating. It's not going to happen, and it's not a good thing. So we really want to, rather than trying to clear our heads and expending all of this energy to not think, what we want to do is focus our thoughts. We want to focus on the current moment. We want to create some self-awareness, which we'll do. If you did the body scan earlier, you created some self-awareness. You checked in with some parts of your body. You found those kind of little tight spots and, checked in with your elbows, which most of us don't really do very often. And it allows you to practice some self-regulation so that when you are calmer and things go awry, particularly in the workplace, you're not flying off the handle. You can say, okay, how do I deal with this right now? What do I need to do in the moment? And then what do I need to do to address this later? And it's a tool that allows you to focus on the goal. So whether your goal is to get the kids out the door in the morning, whether your goal is to get your team to produce more widgets, it allows you as a calmer person to be able to say, okay, how are we going to do this? And let's implement that plan and go forward. And so when we have this self-awareness and we have this self-regulation and we have this goal orientation, we've now come back to this idea of emotional intelligence. So meditation is that tool, that helps us build our emotional intelligence going forward. There are lots of different ways to meditate. We already did one. We did a body scan. You can draw or color. When I went through my training, we had to do a session on coloring. You can do focus meditation. This is the most common one where you focus just on your breath or on a sound like an Om sound or a vision. What that allows you to do is just, again, to focus your attention on one thing so then you're not thinking about all of the other things that are going on in your day, in your life. Some people like to do an imagery or a visualization, so kind of imagining your happy place. Some people find exercise to be very meditative. I'm one of those people. I like to do yoga. I'm a yoga teacher. I used to run quite a bit, not so much anymore. But in those moments, I tend to feel very in the moment and very meditative. Journaling, which we'll talk about in a minute. Also, when I did my training, we did an eating meditation, which is really neat. Really just focusing on what it is that you're eating. When I put this grape into my mouth, what happens when I bite onto it? What is the sensation that's happening? How does it feel going down my throat? How do I feel after I eat the grape? It's a really interesting exercise to do an eating meditation, just to think about all of the things that go into the process of eating. And that's one activity that so often we do mindlessly. So I would encourage you to try eating mindfully. Loving kindness, forgiveness meditation, slow movement, and that kind of comes back to that exercise that I mentioned about the commute. So just kind of moving through your day and just really observing what's happening around you as you move through your day, or just taking a moment as you walk down the hall. Think about all of the muscles that are involved in that walk. And again, really what it's doing is kind of bringing your attention back to the very moment.
I'm going to jump in just really quick, and I'll pull up the graphic again. If you have questions or comments about how this webinar is going along and how you're vibing with it, or want to ask Rebecca something, certainly feel free to email me at scpers@binghamton.edu. But there are a couple of things on here I found that I identify with, and one of them being the mindless eating. And it's not to be judgy of anyone. I'm saying, and I do this myself, is that it's amazing sometimes, just like without thinking, go to the cupboard and get like a quarter of a sleeve of saltines or something, or just, and I'm not really hungry, but it's just eating to burn off some anxiety, or just out of a sense of nothing else to do. And it's sort of, have to stop in my tracks and say, am I really hungry right now? Or do I really, really want this? And sometimes the answer is yes. And I'll just go ahead, and sometimes not. And then I wait until I am hungry, or maybe just go get a glass of water. Sometimes that hunger and thirst can get mistaken in the person's system. And it's like, you think you want to eat, you really are thirsty and you need a glass of water instead. So I found that to be something, helpful to think about. Interesting experiment I've tried doing lately is that I find as I'm having to go from one thing to something else to something else. It's not like Binghamton is a tough market to drive around to. You can get anywhere you want, like 15, 20 minutes, honestly. So that's a great thing about living here. But the New York City guy in me wants to rush everywhere. And I found that if I consciously think about going slower when I'm in a hurry, I wind up at that just right pace. And, if I'm a minute or two late, as long as it's not like, oh, I missed my train or something, whatever it is, it's not a big deal. So something interesting I've been trying out lately, I found that it's helpful because, it's just sometimes the faster you go, like the worse off the outcome is. So just slow it down and to recognize when that's happening.
Yeah. And your cortisol levels are up, and so you're stressed when you're trying to get there. And it takes a couple of minutes for your body to switch gears to, okay, I was driving, I was late, I couldn't find parking, and blah, blah, blah. And now I'm in this meeting, and it takes a minute to settle down and get your brain to thinking, what is this meeting about? And what am I doing here? And I forgot who mentioned it. It might have been Kim Scott, who we'll talk about in a minute. But if you really plan on getting to a meeting even 5 minutes early, like give yourself 5 minutes just to sit in the room or sit on the Zoom call and just allow yourself to settle. It makes such a difference in your demeanor and in your thought process for that particular meeting. So, and whether that's a doctor's appointment or a meeting with your kids at school, it really does make a difference to give yourself that 5 minutes. And if you work in a Google environment like I do, there's a setting on your calendar where you can set meetings for 25 minutes or for 50 minutes. So you build in that time to allow yourself for that transition. Now, we all have it here at Georgetown and nobody follows it, but it's nice to kind of have that idea of just giving yourself that minute to kind of switch gears, to give you that mindful pause, to be able to then focus on the next activity. See. And so journaling. Journaling is a great meditative activity, and it's a great leadership tool. If you are in a leadership position or management position and you are stuck, it is a great tool to sit down and just start to write freehand, and don't type, like actually write on a piece of paper. Just start to write out thoughts, and you can ask yourself, like, why am I stuck? And it's amazing what pops up. If you just start to write down all of the thoughts that pop up in your brain, within 5 or 10 minutes, very often you can figure out either what the solution is or what the next step to do is to figure out the solution. I wish I practiced what I preached more often, but it's a really intense tool, I think, an amazing tool to be able to practice your emotional intelligence, what's going on with me in the moment, my social intelligence, why did those two people get into that argument today, or why is that person mad at me? So it's a fantastic tool for all leaders, and a lot of leaders do it. You hear a lot about different leaders who have diaries and journals and that sort of thing. There are some prompts you'll see on the screen that can get you going. But I think it's a great tool for when you're stuck and trying to solve a problem as a leader, that it helps you kind of move on to that next step. Okay. So we talked about ourselves. We started with the interior, the inner self, and talked about tools for getting to know ourselves and getting to self-regulate and observe ourselves. So now we need to start focusing on our social intelligence and looking outward. It's one of those things where the way to build your social intelligence is to build your social intelligence. It's really start to care for others. Now, if you are not in a position where you have direct reports, it could be something as you're on the street and maybe a child drops a toy, like you go pick up the toy. Just those little acts of kindness can go a long way to make you feel better. And not only are you feeling better about yourself, but you're relying on the external social cues to figure out where you can be helpful. So that in itself is a great tool to start building your social awareness and your social intelligence. If you do have direct reports, and I'll include children in that particular category, start to get to know them, start to care for them. As I mentioned earlier, I had a couple of direct reports who had very different styles, but by getting to know them and by getting to, have lunch with them, have coffee with them, what have you, it allowed me to figure out how they wanted to interact with me as their manager, as their leader. And, again, you don't have to be best friends, but the goal is really to start to understand and have empathy for the people who are around you, because we all have full lives. We are not just people at work. We have lives outside of work, and those external lives affect our work lives. It's that kind of hard line of work-life balance, work-life separation. It's a pretty hard balance to achieve, and a pretty hard line to draw. So, and one of my favorite quotes is from Simon Sinek, who's the author of Leaders Eat Last and several other leadership books. He says that leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in our charge. And I think that's a pretty powerful quote, in that if you start to care for the people around you, again, with this goal and with this idea of moving towards a goal, it starts to make sense as to the difference between leadership and management. So just something to think about going forward. And that kind of brings us to this idea of challenging conversations. So we have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure I touch on this. So this book is probably, the first version of it is about 10 years old now. Now there have been several rewrites and new versions, but it's one of my favorite books on leadership and management specifically. It's a little tech industry focused. Kim Scott works in the tech industry, so there's some of it is not applicable to my kind of softer, fuzzier higher ed industry, but I think some of the principles are good. And so it talks about this idea of, as a manager, as a leader, can you have a challenging conversation? And we so often avoid our challenging conversations because of a lot of reasons. Maybe you are not that confrontational. Maybe it's just uncomfortable. Maybe you're worried about legal implications. A lot of reasons that we kind of avoid these challenging conversations, but they're so important, and they're so important to have. And as somebody who's been on both sides of the challenging conversation, it's always better afterwards in the long run. For better or worse, it's always better. So thinking about challenging conversations, and there's a link here that's in the slides. If you go to radicalcandor.com, it's Kim Scott's site, and you go to her resources, there's a 6-minute YouTube video that kind of explains this, but she talks about caring personally and challenging directly. So, and the simple idea is, are you willing to tell someone that they have spinach in their teeth? So if you have a friend and you see they have spinach in their teeth, and they might be going into a meeting, or they're moving on with their day, do you care enough about them to tell them they have spinach in their teeth? Are you willing to challenge them directly to come up to them and say you have spinach in your teeth? And really, that's the basic idea: is, do you care enough about this person to have this conversation, and are you willing to challenge them or have a direct conversation with them? And then there's kind of, the matrix. There's, if you are willing to challenge directly, but you don't really care about this person, you're probably just making some snarky comments. So you're kind of in this obnoxious aggression quadrant of the matrix here. If you, you care about them quite a bit, but you're not willing to have that conversation, you let them go into the meeting with spinach in their teeth, that's called ruinous empathy. And if you don't care about them and you don't want to challenge them, and you're probably talking about them behind their back, then that's manipulative insincerity. So having those kinds of ideas in mind kind of gives you this framework on which to then have a challenging conversation. So, and I would encourage you, if you are in a situation where you have to have challenging conversations, to take a look at this book, or to Kim Scott's resources on how to do this. And it takes practice. It's not something that comes easy. It's not easy to have challenging conversations, and sometimes the end result is not great at the beginning. Sometimes it gets a little bit worse before it gets better. So, it is something that takes practice. Some pieces of advice: there's a Harvard Business Review article on how to, if you're an introvert or somebody who is non-confrontational, such as myself, how do you have challenging conversations? Really think about beginning from a place of curiosity and stop worrying about being liked. It's like, oh, well, maybe I won't tell them they have spinach in their teeth because they might get mad at me. Well, stop worrying about that. Like, care enough about them to have that conversation. Focus more on what you're hearing and less on what you're saying. So allow the other person to talk as well, instead of just giving them feedback on what went wrong, or how their performance was. Be direct, and then these are my comments in here, but focus on the event and the outcomes versus the person. So making sure you focus on what the incorrect outcome was, the spinach in the teeth, versus the person who, made the choice to have a salad for lunch. So focus on what the outcome was and how do we fix it next time. And don't put it off. An annual review is not the place for a direct report to learn that she or he is not performing well. Have those conversations throughout the year. An annual review is the time just to kind of confirm what happened over the past year, what the goals are for the next year, But if something goes wrong, don't let it fester, because it only makes it worse from there. Expect a positive outcome, although it may take time. Like I said, it might get worse before it gets better. And if you need support from either your manager or HR, don't be afraid to reach out for that support. For me, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, sorry, I would have been okay with waiting, but I was going to offer up a friendly amendment to number 4, that being the annual review is not the place to address something that should have been talked about 6 months ago, and now you're bringing it up when it's too late to do anything about it, and that's not helpful to the employee, or the manager is not really, showing, I think, a lot of consideration for the person they're managing by bringing that up after the fact, can't do anything about it. But one question that comes to mind in looking at this is, um, in somebody trying to avoid having a challenging conversation with someone, how much of that do you think is driven by this mechanism of self-judging? So let's say, well, I don't want to tell somebody this thing because they're going to get upset at me. I mean, you don't know that because that hasn't happened yet.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't control their reaction anyway. Or I'm worried they're not going to like me. Well, is it about them liking you personally? Guess what? Not everybody's going to like you personally. So it's best to get over that pretty quickly.
Yeah, and that's where I think practicing comes into play, is practicing with small things. Before you have that conversation about, the thing that went wrong, practice, maybe at a restaurant, maybe you didn't get the food that you ordered, and practice saying, you know what, I don't really like this. Can I get something else? Or it didn't come out the way I wanted. I am notorious for never sending anything back, because I don't want to make them feel bad. And that's a great place to practice, is in a safe space. And I've also, when I've had to have challenging conversations with some of my direct reports, I have practiced with my supervisor, who I really looked up to. So she and I would have, okay, here's what I want to say. How do I best say it? How do you think this person will react? So kind of practicing that conversation with someone else can also go along with somebody you trust. Or even if it's, a sensitive situation, maybe practicing that with somebody in HR who can kind of give you guidance on what to say and what not to say. Embrace the uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. It's called challenging for a reason. So it gets easier. And like I said, I had a couple of direct reports in my previous role that were challenging. But having those challenging conversations, especially as Steve said, right after the result and not 6 months later, was, it became easier as time went on. And then take that time to reflect on how the conversation went. What could you have said differently, knowing that you can only control yourself? If you have to have that conversation again, either with that person or with somebody else in the future, what would you do differently? And that's where something like journaling comes into play. Maybe you can journal that and write it down and say, okay, next time I would have said it this way and not that way. Or next time I wouldn't have done it right before lunch. I would do it after lunch when we're not hangry. So those sorts of things, really kind of reflecting on what you could have done better, even if it went great. Like, even if you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to have this conversation. And then you have the conversation, it goes so much better than you expect. Like, that's a great time to journal and reflect as well. Remember those things that went well and why they went well, so you can repeat those things in the future. Okay. And just a summary, this is a quote, I'm not sure where I heard it, but it's always stuck with me. Leadership is not about you, but it starts with you. So that theory, the research theory of look for emotional intelligence within you, build that emotional intelligence, look around you for social intelligence. So start within and work your way out, and keep in mind the final goal, again, whether that is moving a team at work or trying to get your kids out the door in the morning. And then put it into practice. Take care of yourself first, take care of the others around you, and then take time to reflect in that order. And you'll find that over time, you will start to become a much better leader, and those who want to follow you versus people you have to control to get things done. Okay. So start today. If you want an accountability partner, you can email Steve or put it in the comments here. I'm happy to follow up with you. I just need your email address. We can talk about what it is that you would like to do this week from a self-care perspective. Maybe it's just taking a mindful walk as soon as this webinar is done, and just using your 5 senses to look around you and discover what's happening around you. And at the very least, stop multitasking. Really practice doing one thing at a time. It's not easy at first. wired to look around and to multitask. But really start to put that one thing into practice. If nothing else today, if you get nothing else from this webinar, please focus on one thing at a time. Okay. And now I'd just like you to check in with your stress level. How are you feeling? Hopefully you're down closer to a 1 versus closer to a 10. You're probably ready to move on with your day, but would love to hear any questions if you have it. And thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and hope you have a great mindful day going forward.
Rebecca, thank you so much. And we have a little bit more than 10 minutes left. So please do send us your questions, and hopefully your stress level did go down from the start of this webinar to this point right now. And if you close your eyes for a meditation just toward the tail end of that, please wake up and send us a question. We'll be happy to get those answered. And so, I mean, just as I watch this and think through the content here, there's so many different things, because these situations are so commonplace that there's multiple things we can identify with that we saw happen or have happened to us, and have either learned the hard way or we did the technique and it worked, and maybe we didn't even realize we were doing it. But think about the whole thing of like managing versus leading, because many times, as you said, these are often incorrectly thought to be the same. I think about what a therapist friend of mine had said to me. It was a different context, but it seems like it really applies here, is the difference between the ego and the spirit. And that's the thing that gets a lot of people into trouble sometimes. They get very, very focused on the ego and trying to look good in front of others, or chasing something for an ego satisfaction, only to find that it really doesn't satisfy them, and they keep doing the same thing over and over. What they really wanted was the spirit. And it's sort of like managing and moving the parts around an organization and being seen as a leader can be very gratifying to some people, but and I've seen this play out in multiple organizations where they're not really leading, and you get somebody in who's got a better handle on balancing the personalities and is more sensitive to people's social, emotional, cultural states. That they may not be seen as necessarily like, wow, we're getting a lot of stuff done, but there's still like a greater amount of harmony in the organization.
And you need both. You need the leaders and those who can balance the social emotional aspect of an organization, and you need the widget makers. And I think too, so often we reward the good widget makers either by allowing them to stay in their role, or by putting them into a management position and expecting that they are just natural leaders, and without giving them the time and space to grow as a leader, because it's a different skill set. So it's as I said at the beginning, it's a very different skill set to lead people and to manage people than to be a part of that sort of what we call an individual contributor, be a part of that team. So I think sometimes those promotions do less of a service than kind of what's on the surface of, you've done so great, we're going to promote you. Well, I hope that if the organization doesn't offer that particular training to become a solid leader, then the person moving into that role takes some time to educate themselves, either by attending a webinar like this, by reading some leadership books, by having a mentor is a great way to become a strong leader, is to have that sort of external third party to bounce ideas off of and to go to when there are challenges, to have that support, because it can be lonely. Being in a leadership position can be very lonely, and sometimes there are things you want to talk about and there's no one to talk about them because it might be too sensitive. So there's a lot to being a good leader that's more than just being good at that first job that you had when you started with the organization.
I have to think part of it is also someone being self-aware of what is it they like doing and what they're good at. So if you're really just happy sitting in your box creating, maybe you're not going to be happy managing people and having one crisis or one problem or question come at you constantly. You're like, I just want to get the stuff done.
Right.
Maybe you're not the type for that. Not that you can't be ever effective at it, but it doesn't match you up with what it is where you'll be happiest or most effective.
Yeah. And that can be a hard self conversation to have, just kind of admitting to yourself, what, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm leadership role or management role. It isn't for me. I'm happy being an individual contributor. Maybe I need to go back to a different role or look for a role in a different organization that allows me to be the individual contributor. And, it's what we call here a spreadsheet jockey. Some people, including myself, I like my spreadsheet time. So sometimes it's good to have that spreadsheet time, but I also like the balance of having that leadership role as well. So it's just, for some people, you just kind of have, again, like you said, that self-awareness of what are my strengths? Where are my areas for improvement? Don't like to use the term weaknesses, but where are my areas for improvement? And what do I want to focus on? What can I do to enhance my strengths and maybe outsource my weaknesses? So yeah, there's a lot of self-awareness to being a good leader as well.
So I'm curious, in your research or experience, have you noticed any noticeable differences in, say, introverts and extroverts as far as who is a more effective leader? So on one hand, you could say somebody who's extrovert and a people person might seem a more natural to succeed at being the leader of people. At the same time, somebody who's introverted, maybe they're so deep and introspective and emotionally sensitive that they can pick up certain things in others that maybe those around them just don't have the ability to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, and there's been a lot of research lately, particularly that has shown up in a Harvard Business Review, that the stereotype is that the extroverts are the leaders. So most CEOs, not all, but a good majority or a good portion of CEOs came up through sales or marketing. So, and that's kind of a natural-ish extrovert kind of area, usually within most organizations. So they tend to be much more extroverted and they get that energy from those around them. And that's the difference between extroversion and introversion, is where you get your energy from. Is it from those around you or is it kind of internal? But those who are more introverted tend to be better leaders because they take the time to stop and listen one-on-one. Whereas extroverts, and again, this is a stereotype, but you get your energy from the group. So you want the party, you want the group, and you want to kind of process your thoughts out loud and have everybody listen to you. Whereas introverts tend to focus one-on-one with somebody. So they tend to be rated as better leaders because they take that time to make the listener feel heard. So that's where you can, if you are an introvert, that's your superpower, right? Is to be able to stop, listen to the person, hear what they're saying. And introverts, we tend to process a little bit more quietly. We tend to process internally versus out loud. So take the time to process that information and then figure out the next steps from there. And that's where introverts are really appreciated as leaders going forward.
One more question, then we're kind of going to come up to the top of the hour, and we'll go into part of the webinar where we wrap things up. In the work that you do with people, is there any sort of exercise around getting people to really take a hard look at how they manage their time in a given day? So what made me think of that is when you said earlier about I'm going to have my time when I'm on the spreadsheets and I have my time when I'm a people person, and I realize that I need the mix of both, where we want to get people to stop multitasking and have a real idea of what they can get done in a particular day. And it's just too easy. Like, you're loading up things on the plate, as I always like to say. You get to the table, like, I can't eat all of this. We've got to make some changes. So curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love productivity books, productivity hacks, all of that stuff. I'm always looking for ways to kind of figure out my day. Haven't figured out the perfect version yet, but what I do love and do encourage people to do, and I wish more people would do this, is to do that kind of time blocking or time boxing or what have you. And I curse email. I think it's, for most people who really can't quite get a handle on it, it can be a time suck. There are ways to kind of get your attention and kind of arms around your inbox, but again, that's a different webinar. But I think if you can, the way to take advantage of your time, and I completely understand so much of us don't have control over our time, other people have control over our time, but the more you can block off time on your calendars or in your day to say, this is my time to do X. And even if it's just 30 minutes to an hour, you'll feel so much more productive and so much better if you can just check one thing off a list. And the other thing I tell people is, just pick one thing per day. If you get that one thing done and you can call that day a success, what is that one thing? And do that first. So if your one thing is to sit down and do a spreadsheet and get it done, block off 30 minutes, get the spreadsheet done, and then the rest of the day, it'll go as it goes. But the more you can even just control a little bit of your day and feel like you get that one thing done, the better you're going to feel about the rest of your day when it goes awry.
And it's amazing how just taking one thing off the table can just change the
One
complexion of the whole day.
checkbox.
Say, no, I'm not going to do this meeting or this other activity. No, this is a little bit too much in a day like this. And it's like,
Yeah.
and take a breath, because we all had guilty of this as well, of doing a Zoom meeting on your phone, driving a kid to a practice, and eating at the same time, or
Mhm.
something that where
Mhm.
you can with two hands get all of that done, three different things. And
Right.
are you super happy doing it? Absolutely not.
Right.
So
You don't
uh,
remember what you ate and you missed the kid's soccer goal, and it doesn't work
you're
in
not
the long
listening because hopefully you're watching the traffic, or you're
Yeah.
mid bite and something happens, or you miss your kid getting a base hit, and
Yeah.
so less is more, I think, is a
Exactly.
really good way to wrap up. Rebecca, thank you so much for
Thank
joining us.
you,
It's
Steve.
great to have you. And yes, if you need an accountability partner, either one of us would be willing. I'm probably tougher than she is. I don't know, maybe not. But email us here at the alumni office. I'll put this back up. If you think of a question later, just something
Mhm.
that you want to try to get over to Rebecca, I will be happy to forward that over. So feel free to do that. So Rebecca, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
And we'll be back on Thursday with the second of the two webinars that are part of Binghamton Success Week. And this one will be titled, I'll grab up the sheet here, Fulfillment and Well-Being in the Workplace. So this will have a noon start. Today we started at 1, a little bit different than we normally do. But Thursday's webinar is back in the noon hour that we normally have, Fulfillment and Well-Being in the Workplace. That will be a great program. So be sure to check that out. And we look forward to seeing you then. So for Rebecca Cassidy, I'm Steve C. Prasad. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next webinar.